Hi, I'm David Ryan, and a very warm welcome to another edition of People and Politics. I've had a really amazing week. I'm just back from Conservative Party conference, which is a phrase I never thought I'd say. But I had a blast and I met so many politicians and people from the media, and I'm really inspired to keep going with this podcast. If you know already subscribe to my podcast, I'd be very grateful if you did. Joining me in today's show is somebody that I've known for a while and has become a good friend of mine. Jeremy Balfour is an MSP and one of very few MSPs or indeed MPs with an obvious disability, and he didn't set out to be a champion of disability, as you'll discover, but is kind of moved into that role. And so I'm really looking forward to talking to him today, to hear his story and hearing his thoughts in general about disability here in Scotland and the rest of the UK. So, here we go. Welcome to another edition of People and Politics. Jeremy, thank you very much for doing this. At last, we've been talking about doing this for a while, and one thing leads to another, and but we're here at last. It's great to see you again.
Good to see you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, not at all. And as you probably know, I'm just back. I'm just back from Conservative Party conference in Birmingham, and that's something I never thought I would. I never thought I'd say. But and even more, I had a really great time and I met so many people and it was really amazing, but exhausting. Just
But take it out of your conference. You do a lot of walking, don't you, and a lot of talking.
I felt like I walked for miles. I really did, but I'm knackered. So yeah. But anyway, I thought we'd start, if it's okay with you, I thought we'd start here in Edinburgh because you went to Edinburgh Academy, which is for people who don't know, that's a pretty nice school in Edinburgh. And so I want to ask you, how was your experience at school, and when was your first was it feelings about disability and how you felt about yourself at that time?
Yeah, I mean, I had a really fortunate experience. I had a really good experience at school. Um, my parents chose to send me to mainstream education, private school, but mainstream education. I have an older brother who was 6 years above me at school, so we didn't actually ever in the same school at the same time. And then I had a younger brother who was a couple of years below me. So it was having family there probably helped a wee bit. Also, it went all the way through. So I started kind of in the nursery department when I was 4, and then went all the way through to leaving school at 17. So yeah, I mean, it was very positive. I had a good bunch of friends who kind of came through school with me. Because I've always had my disability, it's something that I was born with. Obviously they grew up knowing who I was. They knew what I could do, what I couldn't do. I think the school allowed me to do as much as I could do within my disability. They made, I think, appropriate changes for when I couldn't do that. I wasn't particularly ever really bullied at school either, which I think surprises people. Um, Partly because I think it was who I always was, and so I think it would have been different if I'd gone into school at a secondary level or later on in level. But
Mm.
because that's always who I was, that was just we all kind of got on with it. So I was very fortunate. I wasn't particularly really just at all brilliant. And I suppose in many ways, I never worked my way through my disability really until almost leaving school. It was just something that I was born with. It was something that I had. And I think my parents, my siblings, my school said, "Will you get on with it and make the most of it?" And maybe I haven't ever, I think some people say, ever dealt with it or confronted it properly, but I get on with it and just deal with it.
It said that you had a really positive experience at school, which is great because there's a lot of disabled people, and I'm sure you understand that. For example, I think of I remember being in mainstream primary school, and I just remember the bullying. I don't remember, I don't remember much more about it. I just remember unhappy days in the playground. But that's fantastic. And I think it's great that what you said that you were with the same students from 3 or 4 years old. And I think
Yeah,
that's quite a difference,
yeah.
which is great. So when you left school, you went on to study law at Edinburgh, and I think it's important to say that you're from a dynasty of lawyers.
Yeah,
Who,
it's a family thing. My great grandfather was a solicitor. He came down from Orkney and set up a firm with his nephew, actually. And then my grandfather, father, and then myself, although I was in law for really a very short period of time, it was probably never going to be the thing that I was going to focus on. So yeah, again, I was fortunate that I managed to get a few results at school. I obviously had people who were in the legal profession already, so I had that big advantage. I mean, I think it is interesting what you say. I mean, I think I am in many ways still quite naive, even in my kind of 50 whatever years I've been on this earth. And it wasn't really until I came, I know we're going to come on to this more, but it wasn't until I came into the parliament that I found my experience wasn't what most disabled people's experience is or was.
right, right.
Um, and the more I live, the longer I live, the more I realize I'm very fortunate of the experiences I've had. Now, I think partly that is due to my disability.
Yeah.
I think there is a spectrum of disability where some disabilities will give you much harder, difficult experiences than other disabilities.
Mm,
I very fortunate that when I was very, very young, within a year of being born, the surgeon that was responsible cut my two fingers to give me two fingers.
oh,
And that has made such a radical difference because I could write, I could feed myself, I could use my fingers limited, but I'd enough to be able to do some things which I think would not have happened without that. So I've been very fortunate with that. And I think the sad thing is I think that's not everyone's experience.
right.
And that I'm sure we're coming on to in a moment. But I think that in many ways now drives me much more than if you'd said to me 20 years ago, 30 years ago.
Of course, yeah. When you were studying law, did you want to practice law? Was that something you wanted to do?
Yeah, I mean, I did go on, so I did my degree, did the diploma, I did a traineeship in a firm, and then went and worked in my father's firm for a couple of years. So yeah, I mean, I think initially, I think probably that was something I was thinking about. I think the law was changing. The law has changed in practice. How people work has
Yeah.
changed dramatically, even in my lifetime. When my father was a solicitor, he would buy a house in the morning, make a will at lunchtime, and divorce somebody in the afternoon. So you were much more an all-round practitioner, and that's gone. And I think the kind of much more corporate mentality of legal firms has come in as well. So I think the law has changed, that how firms work has changed. I'm not sure I was the best lawyer anyway. I'm not claiming that, I don't think I have the best legal ability anyway. But yeah, I mean, I enjoyed my law degree. I mean, I enjoyed the, I enjoyed learning about law. I think it's an interesting thing to do anyway. I had a good experience in some of the clubs around university. I got to know some good people at that time. So yeah, I mean, it was a positive experience, but I think ultimately the day-to-day practice of law and me were never going to be uh, compatible for that long.
Impossible. No, and so you went on to Bible college in London, and so presumably throughout your education, your time your time at university, presumably your faith must have been important at that time, or is that something you came to later?
No, well, I mean, I was both my parents were Christians, so we went to church every Sunday. I think when I was a kind of teenager, in my young teenage years, it became a personal thing for me. It's something that I um, said, yeah, I want to believe in Jesus. I want him to be in charge of my life. Um, I still have made so many mistakes and things that I regret, that it doesn't mean you live a perfect life. But my Christian faith is really important to me, has always been important to me. I went to Bible college. I think there were questions that I wanted to explore further and probably deeper. And also, I think it was a way that ultimately was going to lead to where I ended up doing things that I'm doing now, allowed me to open those doors. I mean, again, interestingly, people say to you, how do you hold to a loving God, a God who is love, and have a disability? Why do God, and that's a big question. And we could spend the next 4 hours talking about that. But for me, I think there is not that dichotomy. I think there is, for me, a loving God who knows me individually, who looks after me. And ultimately, things will not always be as they are. So, yeah, it was a really important time for me. It was an important time for me to grow up because I was in my kind of late 20s. I never lived away from home. I did law in Edinburgh, worked in Edinburgh. And I think for me, being away from just for that 3 terms, or well, 3 terms a year for 3 years, was really important. I think it allowed me to find myself a bit more, to maybe confront my disability a bit more, to make me think about things. So it was, a very much defining moment, I think, those 3 years of my life.
Yeah, yeah, it's good. Because you said a bit earlier on, it was after you left school that you started to think about disability and your experience. And I really wonder what that looked like for you, what that meant for you. Can you remember what went on at that time?
Well, I think because you go to university, so you've left a fairly safe environment at school, where I've known people, 12, 13 years, we'd grown up together. Um, Nobody from my class went on to do law in Edinburgh. Very few people went to university in Edinburgh. They most went to other places or did other things. So I was suddenly thrown into an environment, a place where I had to make new friends. It was a place where people didn't know what I could do, couldn't do. You face different challenges of lecture halls, writing notes, having to do essays. So that whole thing. So I think for me, it was suddenly my disability became a bit more real. Um, I think you had to learn that you couldn't do everything, which is a difficult thing to learn, that, there will be things that I will never be able to do. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think it was a moment where it just kind of, you were faced a bit more with who you are and what are you going to do with the rest of your life, how much will my disability define me, hold me back, whatever word you want to use. So those issues started to come a bit more into my mind, I think.
Yeah, sure. So I think everyone said that you worked at the back. Excuse me. You worked as the Baptist minister for a while. You were assistant minister in in the church that I can see from here. And so, at what point did you think, what politics is uh, part of me, and
Yeah.
I want to stand for politics?
Well, actually, it goes all the way back, funny enough, to my school days. So my final year at school, I had to find one more subject to study, and the only one I could do within a year was politics. Well, that interested me at all with politics, and I knew nothing about politics. Didn't come from a political family. Wasn't something that I was particularly interested. And actually, there was only three of us in the class, and one of them was a Lib Dem, one of them was a Labour supporter. So just purely, really out
Ba-
of fairness, they
Balanced,
started to argue.
a
But I'm
balanced
back
class.
in the mid-80s when politics and life was very different from what it is today. But yeah, so I got into that when I went on to study further. I got involved in more within the Conservative Party. 1987 was my first election campaign, which we lost, which maybe should have been a starting point of my career. And so, but stayed involved when I went and started working, delivered leaflets, did a lot of what people do, stood a couple of times for local elections unsuccessfully. Um, then came back to it a bit more in '99. So we had the election then for the first Scottish Parliament. I stood in Musselburgh, Edinburgh East and Musselburgh,
Oh,
and came a solid fourth. Um, and then kind of moved away, was involved in the church, was being a minister, and actually still was involved, still was doing things in the background, still helping out locally. And then actually the day I came back from my honeymoon in 2005, Monday morning, I received a phone call from somebody within our local area to say sadly one of the local councillors had died. Councillor where I lived had suddenly died, and would I think of standing
well,
for a seat? And I did. I stood, became a councillor, and I suppose that then moved me into kind of active politics. Really, really enjoyed the council. I think we don't give enough respect to councillors. We don't fully understand some of the big decisions that they are making within
listen,
pretty difficult circumstances. So, but really like being a councillor. And then I suppose 9 years ago now, 10 years ago, got to the age where I was thinking it's either now or never for Scottish Parliament,
well,
and threw my hat in the ring and ended up here. So yeah, but yeah, I've been involved. I suppose it's coming up 19 years now since I was elected as a councillor, but really been involved at the grassroots level, really since university days.
right, that's great. And I think it's fair to say that I'm sure you agree that you're one of very, very few politicians in public life who haven't some obvious disability, and I wonder if that's something that yeah, that you feel is important, and I think it's right to say that you've become a champion for disability issues, not just in Scotland, but across the Conservative Party, and it sounds like you feel strongly about.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think if you'd said to me 10 years ago, you're going to go into the Scottish Parliament and what you're going to spend most of your time doing is disability, I would have probably not accepted that. I would have probably
Yeah,
not thought I was going to be the way. I didn't go into the Parliament thinking I am going to be the disability campaigner on this. It wasn't something that I'd worked out in my head at all. Um, so when I arrived in Parliament 8.5 years ago, I was the only physically disabled MSP. Um, there have been MSPs before, with somebody with visual impairment and others, but in that Parliament, I was the only one. So I suppose inevitably, right or wrongly, things like the cross-party group on disability, other organisations came. And I think this is where I go back to what I said maybe earlier. It was a bit of a wake-up call that
mm,
my experience hadn't been everyone else's experience. I don't have that many physically disabled friends. I just,
oh,
it's not something that I've worked through school or college, university, whatever. Um, so
mm,
listening to charities, listening to individuals, it became pretty clear to me that there needs to be a much bigger voice. Now, I'm pleased in this Parliament we've got a number of people with disabilities, both physical and hidden. I think there's a bit more openness to it. I think, my colleague Pam Duncan Clancy has been a very activist in my past and still doing that in a great way. There are others, Emma Roddick, there's Julie Mackay. So we've got people from 4 out of the 5 parties who will identify with a physical disability, which is great. But there's a long way to go. I mean, I do think just the day-to-day stuff that people face, if they've got a disability or they live with some disability, it's difficult to explain that unless you live with it.
Yeah, agreed.
And I do think post-COVID, things have got worse. I think there's greater pressures on people with disability. I think there's greater pressure on local authorities, on the health service to provide stuff. I think again, you can romanticize it, but I do think actually the NHS back in the 70s and 80s when I was growing up, although not as medically developed, probably had a much better attitude and a much more to-do thing than we do today. I think waiting list, pressure time, money affects disabled people so much. So there's a lot that we need to do. I think there's a lot we have to educate people on, but also providing services as well. So I am one voice amongst other voices. We, I think, work quite well together on disabled issues across party. I would like to see a lot more happening. I am frustrated sometimes by even the UK government, which was obviously in power for 14 years. For my party, I get frustrated with this particular government because I think of all the people with protected characteristics, I think disabled is at the bottom of the list. And I don't think that's done on purpose. I just think we don't shout loud enough and we're not coordinated enough. I remember one mum saying to me, it takes all my effort to get my child out of bed and to school in the morning. I don't have any more energy.
Yeah.
And that is a problem. That we don't have that energy, that movement, that oomph that other people have. And so I think subconsciously it's just forgotten about by too many politicians.
Right, yeah, as you're talking there, I identifying, I understand so many of the issues that you spoke about. For example, years ago, I think I used to appear on radio or something, and I would always get introduced as a disability campaigner. And I thought, I am so not a disability campaigner. I just happen to have a disability, but I think if you're, I think you get pigeonholed in that role. And I would completely agree with you that in many instances, for example, health, disabled people, and particularly people with learning disabilities, they have done the worst health outcomes of anybody, and they are absolutely bottom of the heap. And I think it's more difficult for disabled people to to have their voice heard. I think that's the whole trouble. But so I think it's terrific that you and people like Pat and Clancy are there, but like I said, it's a long way to go. And but one of the things I wanted to ask you about was, I'm aware of the work that you've done over recent months in trying to appoint a disability commissioner for Scotland. I wonder if you could tell a bit of the background to that and what stage you're at with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably when I came back 3 years ago now, just over 3 years ago, coming out of COVID, just talking to the third sector, talking to disabled people, and a bit like just said a moment ago, but there is not that coordinated voice on disabled issues. So, we have a Children's Commission here in Scotland, who I think has done a lot of good, but there's nothing for disability. And so I've gone down the line of looking whether we should have a disability commissioner here in Scotland, somebody who can deal with all disability. Now, actually, some people say, well, that's far too wide. And to some extent that probably is true, but actually having talked to many groups and individuals over the last 2 to 3 years, whatever your disability, the issues are the same. So it's education, it's health, it's
Yeah.
social care, it's transport. Now it will manifest itself in different ways. So if your disability is different from my disability, so how you want to see things change might be slightly different, but it will be often the same issues. So I do think one individual can deal with that. So yeah, the bill is now at committee. They've taken all the evidence, the Equalities and Human Rights Committee. They will now have to write a report, and I think probably before Christmas it will come to Parliament, and Parliament will have to agree or disagree on the general principles of the bill. I have to say, as I sit here this morning, I'm a bit pessimistic. I
Really?
think probably for different reasons, some of them more valid or less valid than others. I think the Parliament may not vote for this bill, which is disappointing. The government, I think, are not going to support it. And so the bill will probably, or may well, not be in existence after the end of this year, which I find disappointing. I mean, not just for myself, but actually we have seen in the last month really quite a lot of issues where disabled people have been set back. So we were expecting a whole range of human rights coming to Scottish law. That bill has been put into the law and passed. Those with neurological conditions, autism, were expecting a bill that has been pretty well said no to for this Parliament. We saw £10 million taken out of a budget to produce more change in place toilets. That's gone. A couple of years ago, Pam Glancy's bill on the whole issue of changing from school into college or university or work, that whole transition bill didn't get through Parliament. And I do think we could easily end up in 14 months' time saying this Parliament had an opportunity to do quite a lot for disabled people at not that much of cost, and we said no to them all. And I find that quite frustrating. And I think you either, knock the dust off and walk away and say, well, that's it, or I hope people will say, look, we need to take this even more seriously. We need to get more people involved. We need to keep campaigning on these issues. And so, yeah, and that's not just government, that's across all political parties. So yeah, I think I worry for where the disability issues are on people's agendas across the parties. I think there's an opportunity to do something, whether we take that or not. Well, let's wait and see in the next couple of months.
It's so frustrating to hear you say that you're down for the bill will pass, because I think, like you said a bit earlier on, disabled people really remain kind of bottom of the heap, and it would really it's gonna take a lot to really get the voices of disabled people heard in society and government and policy start making. And this is a terrific way to do it. But I think that for some reason there's just still not the appetite, and people just can't see that disabled people are still so underrepresented, and sometimes are kept down, and of course disabled people and disabled services have suffered greatly post-pandemic, because because money is tight for everybody. But I think, the same people have really, suffered the brunt of the cuts, and it's sad. And I don't know what that would take to change.
I think, I mean, I think I was reflecting on this actually earlier in the week with a couple of people. I mean, I do think, I think sometimes it's a lot easier to explain issues in regard to other protected characteristics. So I think because disability is quite varied, there are different competing voices within that,
Yeah.
that sometimes is not that well coordinated.
No.
And I do think sometimes, and I understand why, and please don't hear me wrong, but I sometimes don't think we shout loud enough. I
No.
think we take a few crumbs, either from the UK government or from Scottish government or from local authorities, um, and we say, "Oh, great, we've had that win." Well, it's not really a win. It's a few crumbs,
Yeah.
and I think there just need to be a rethink within the sector, within individuals, to say, how do we campaign and how do we coordinate ourselves better so our voice is heard? And I think that's a challenge that I need to hear, and we just need to do a bit of work on, um, because our voice isn't heard that well. It's not loud enough within that public square, and I think we need to do more on it, and others need to help in regard to that. So I think there is a challenge in regard to that because there are a number of issues which are coming forward in regard to funding, in regard to where do we see services going in the next number of years, both at a UK level and at a Scottish Parliament level. But I'm just not sure we have that voice worked out particularly well on. And we need to think about that, and we need to think about that quite carefully. As I said, as you said yourself, I didn't come in here necessarily to be a campaigner on disabled issues, but
No.
I am where I am, and I now feel responsibility for future generations that we can do more, and we need to do more, because if not, the gap will get bigger and bigger.
Of course, I think it has in some ways got bigger, but over the last 14 years, just because of the sort of the money cuts and the cuts and we have to try and stop that gap, getting bigger. I'm I'm confident we're getting near the end of our time together. There's one more issue I wanted to talk to about because we meet on a day that Keir Starmer is trying to really rush the assisted suicide bill through Westminster, and I wonder if you thought that will come back to Holyrood before the end of this Parliament. And
Yep.
what,
So there's a bill. Liam MacArthur, the Lib Dem MSP
yeah,
for Orkney, has a bill. It's going to committee um, over the next 2 or 3 weeks, and I'm expecting that the Parliament would do like we do with my bill, at a stage one vote, probably sometime next year, early next year.
yeah,
I think it's an issue that MSPs are now starting to talk about. There's been quite a lot of campaigning on both sides of the issue. I mean, I do have concerns. I have concerns for a number of reasons. I do think it will have a bigger impact on those with disability
yeah,
than those without disability.
mm-hmm,
Not all disabled people agree on that, and I absolutely respect that. But it's interesting, the overwhelming majority of third sector disabled charities who are member led are saying this bill will be negative towards
yeah,
us. Again, I'm not sure that's been heard enough, and we need to get that voice heard better. I am concerned in regard to when you get the genie out of the bottle, it's impossible to get the genie back in the bottle.
yeah, yeah,
And I think if you do look at other jurisdictions, particularly Canada, where the law was initially drafted very similar to what is in Liam MacArthur's bill, look to where it now is, look what's happened in places like Holland and other countries in Western Europe. Inevitably, it will become more relaxed. And people will start saying, but if that person can do it, why can't I do it? And that puts a lot of pressure on disabled people,
yeah,
particularly societal pressure, which is not necessarily done on purpose, but just by what you hear, by what you say. I can see the day when someone says, you know how much it costs for the state to keep you alive.
yeah,
Do you know how much you get on benefits? That money could be used to educate young people. could be used to create whatever. And the pressure suddenly is just in your mind.
Yeah.
Am I worth it? Is my life that worth it? Now, as someone who's a Christian, believes that every individual is created with worth. Actually, the United Nations recognize that everybody is worth in themselves. So that's where identity comes from.
Yeah.
And I just worry, and I understand why, and I hear the arguments for the bill, but I would be really cautious. And I, at the moment, won't vote for it. I
Yeah.
think there's too many risks, and I just think we are better not to go down that road. But that we will see what happens both at Westminster and here in Scotland. But yeah, we're going to see some votes in both parliaments in the next year or so.
Yeah. I, I, I completely agree with you, and I really sincerely hope it doesn't go through, but I'm a bit pessimistic.
Yeah. Well, you got to be hopeful. You got to be
Yeah,
hopeful.
you got my hope. But by talking to you today, I've really, I really think that the recurring theme is that, disabled people's voices are 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 sparse, and I think that's a lot of trouble with disability that our voice isn't often heard, and so I think we need to keep campaigning. I think a commissioner would be a great idea, and yeah, I think that's the only way to really hear the voice of disabled people. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, but anyway, Jimmy, I would like to thank you very much indeed for your time today. It's been great. It's been great talking to you and hearing your story. It's one of some issues, and I'm really grateful for your time.
Well, thank you, and thank you for having me. It's been great to be with you.
No, so thanks again. Take care. Bye.